Um, I'm so freaking tempted. I'm sitting here. I'm tempted to ask you, and I don't know if I should. And if you don't want, you cannot answer. Do you think you ever killed anyone?
I think I recognized the injustice within my own family from an early age, and I, at a very early age, became interested in martial arts. When I initially became homeless, I was able to get a job at a gym where I was teaching children's gymnastics and Tai Chi and things like that. Um, and I started doing Taekwondo, and throughout my time as a teenager, became a well achieved competitor in Taekwondo and martial arts. So it was really kind of the values around Eastern philosophy that I started to adopt. Um, but also, I think I always knew that the world around me was not good enough. It wasn't what I wanted it to be, and that didn't give me any permission or right to be any less than my own standard.
So you did have it sounds like you did have role models, perhaps someone in, your trainer, perhaps. Did you have some sort of role models that you can remember? Maybe you can shout out, man, like
Yeah. So there was definitely a few individual figures who helped me out along the way. Ben Gums was a gentleman who helped me in that children's gymnastics gym to get one of my first jobs. Linda, who gave me one of my first jobs as a waiter. I think I was 14, and um, Mike Daroon was my sensei in JW Park Academy for Taekwondo. All of them were great influences, and kind of helped me along, even if they didn't necessarily know all of my different struggles, but
mhm.
that's all right.
Shout out to all of them, man, for contributing in such a great human being. Throughout all those years, because it seems like your life is freaking, it's moving fast, man. How are you dealing with trauma? Like, what was that like?
Well, I had my good moments and my bad moments. Another embarrassing aspect about me is I was a little bit goth in high school, so I
That's cool, man.
had that trench coat and dyed black hair thing going on.
Mhm.
Um, and my group of other burnout friends, if you will, who are all great people nowadays, for the record. But yeah, I definitely had moments where the trauma did get to me, and I had some moments I would not be proud of in hindsight, but ultimately I pulled through.
Did you ever, throughout what during your teenage years, did you ever end up like trying drugs or alcohol or anything like that? Were you ever pulled to that?
So I never did drugs. I never smoked weed in my teenage years, or actually tried any THC or anything like that until after the military and
Oh
getting
wow.
later.
Yeah.
Um, Mainly because I knew that in high school I couldn't afford it, and I thought it was addictive. So I was like, okay, if I try drugs, I'm not going to be able to keep it going. So I just stayed away from it. I did start drinking when I was about 16. I had some friends that could get alcohol, and I decided I was old enough to start making my own mistakes. And in some aspects, that's a terrible thing to think that you've got this kid that's in that situation that's doing those things. But in other aspects, it helped me heal a lot socially. It helped me come out of my shell, and it helped me become who I am.
Yeah, were you ever afraid, because coming from the background that you have, were you ever afraid that you might like catch an addiction, and things like that?
I was, yes.
Yeah, man. Listen, I can't say this enough, man. Congratulations, man. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking like there should be a movie made on this, man. And I think that you should share this story more. It opens up a whole different like aspect of you. I'm seeing the kind of fighter that you are, man. It's blowing my mind. It's very honorable, and yeah, that is definitely role model like, man. So what was to all of us that don't know, how long were you in Iraq, and what was Iraq like by, you said, 2009? Like, was
Yep.
it were the things kind of ending at that point, or like what was it like? What were some of the things that you seen and experienced over there?
Yeah. So Iraq in 2009, we were pretending to wind down. Of course, things weren't truly winding down because everyone knows we had troops there long into the 2020s. But we had been attempting to shut down a lot of bases and hand things over to the Iraqi army at that time, and we were attempting to set up voting or actual voting booths and polling places in the country of Iraq. At some time, we had quite a few bombings. We had the Baghdad Gate bombing, which was a 10,000-pound UBE that rolled a MRAP about 7 times, and I assisted in cleaning out the remains of troops that were in that. First time I rolled out the gate of Diamondback on route, I think it was Route Toyota. I was out the gate for all of 2 minutes, and a 7.62 hit square in the bulletproof glass right in front of me, and as we call it, popped my cherry as I was going out. And I was a combat medic, so my first patient was somebody that was supposed to be targeting us. They had set up what was basically an infrared tripped IED, but because our convoy was a little bit delayed, there was a family that had got on the road in a sedan in front of us and took that IED. The back half of the sedan was cut off, and there was at least 3 dead boys in the back. There was a 12-year-old boy up front that was basically severed in half and bleeding out and still conscious. He died about a minute after I got there, and the father was trapped behind the steering wheel, and he died as well. Um, I kind of learned right away that as a medic, the people I was able to help and save were going to make it regardless of me. It was like God had already decided those people were going to make it. The people who didn't make it, I don't think there's anything that I could have done different to help them make it. Um, so I had about 22 patients, live patients throughout. About half of them were local nationals or civilians, and the rest of them were either enemy combatants, two enemy combatants, as well as about 9 U.S. troops. So that were combat casualties or injuries. So as well as some regular health care intervention in a sick call scenario or in a battalion aid station or a cache. So quite a bit of experience. I was there 13 months the first time. So that was it was a lot at 20 years old at the time, and turned 21 in Iraq. Couldn't drink yet because you can't drink in a deployment, for those who don't know, except the Super Bowl, which was totally stolen that year, but that's beside the point. Um, so yeah, that was all kind of a crazy experience. And there was times I did engage the enemy that sometimes when it was necessary, and sometimes when I felt it was unnecessary. So there's things I've done I would not be proud of, and things that if someone else was in my land to do, I would not be opposed to taking action against them. So I really saw a very firsthand perspective of the realities of war, and it wasn't what it's advertised or sold to be.
When you said pop your cherry, does that mean it was the first time you seen a dead body? Is that what it is?
No, Pop Your Cherry. What I'm referring to is first time I was shot at and going out the wire.
Oh wow. Damn, that's crazy. You mentioned God. At the time when you're out there and when when you're a teenager then going into the military, did you believe in God and a higher power?
I I did not, because I'd mentioned earlier that my mother had been a Pentecostal, and she was abusive. The Bible was kind of her favorite tool to beat her children with, and she thought it gave her the right to do so. And so as I became, separated in that divorce and then homeless, I was very much angry at God, if you will, and I was one of those insufferable atheists that looked at every little point in every little meme and thought that I knew everything because of it as a teenager. And it wasn't um, till I deployed and I really saw kind of the reality. But also, I realized my life was a certain way for a reason, and I hadn't got to the point I was in without help.
Hmm.
Um, and I also realized that all the atheists I knew were basically pricks. I've never known one to be good and moral and ethical for a very long time.
Hmm.
So I kind of realized that the best people I knew were, from wholesome religious families that were Catholic, that were Mormon, that were Jewish, that were Muslim. It didn't matter which religion, but those were the people that when I looked at who I was interacting with, I respected the most. And I decided it was time for me to adopt Catholicism as my religion, just because that's the one I identified with. And that's I would consider myself Catholic to this day.
Did you get baptized?
I have not been baptized.
Okay. Do you think seeing death like right in front of your eyes kind of uh opens up your perception to God more, like when you finally see someone pass and it's a.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about from a medic's perspective or just from an anatomy and physiology's perspective, whether you're talking about a human being or an animal, you got your tissue, you've got your skin, you've got your muscle, you've got your bone, you've got all these things there, um, and they're there, dying in front of you, but you can sense the very moment that the life force, the soul, the being is no longer there present in that bone and tissue and blood. And it's a very moving thing, and it's not as traumatic as people would think. It's more of you're watching the release. They're no longer suffering, but you know that they're okay. And it's not that they're just permanently gone. It's that they're somewhere else. That was never actually them. That was never the soul. That's just the flesh and bone and blood.
Going into Iraq, did you know the history? Did you know about Saddam Hussein? Did you know about the Sunnis and the Shias? Like, did you know the background?
I was moderately aware, as I was always more of a student of history than people around me. I appreciated history, but I couldn't necessarily say that I could hold a candle to any local who would have known 100 times more than I most likely did as I got there.
Looking back, do you think it's important for like soldiers to really know the background? And do you think that the military kind of doesn't put enough force into getting soldiers interested in such things?
I would say whether the soldier knows that or not, the soldier is being guided by forces and powers that are much bigger than the soldier, um, and knowing that information doesn't necessarily help the soldier on the ground. Um, it might help them be empathetic towards the local population, but it doesn't mean that they won't have to do their job. And their job is more often than not driven by money and greed and politics that are way beyond anything they have the ability to affect at the ground level.
You mentioned that one of the guys that you came into Iraq with initially was charged with, if I'm not mistaken, like child something happened. He did something to the children, something terrible. Did you ever yourself see crazy things like that, where you thought like this is beyond, like this is unhumane, man?
So I never saw any instances of abuse in relation to that. Nothing from Garcia would have indicated to me at that time that was something he was a part of. Um, and I never saw anything similar to Abu Ghraib or the abuse of local nationals. I did see or participate in things that I consider militarily unnecessary. There was an instance where we had an IED go off about 25 meters behind my truck. I was in a four chalk convoy, and with the sergeant major who was two trucks in front of me, so about 100 meters. And he wanted to stop and dismount, and because we didn't have a lot of bodies on that mission, I was the dismount with him, and we followed the command line det for that IED that had already missed us, and found two individuals who had fired it, who I suspect were father and son, and ended their lives. And was that necessary? I don't think so. Um,
Yeah, but sometimes it's like, it's hard to judge unless you're in that situation, man. It's really simple to be like this, just person from the sidelines and judging everyone. But I guess, once you're there, things change. Um, I'm so freaking tempted. I'm sitting here. I'm tempted to ask you, and I don't know if I should. And if you don't want, you cannot answer. You think you ever killed anyone?
I have,
And you know that for sure?
I know that for sure.
Okay. Um, how is there a program for soldiers? Like, how do soldiers deal with this sort of trauma?
Um, there are programs, but I wouldn't say any of them are necessarily effective. And the majority of soldiers are when we go to war, we're expected to behave a certain way. We're expected to, defend ourselves or kill or follow orders to a T, regardless of any kind of emotional attachment to that. When you return stateside, you're expected to behave in a upstanding citizen, portray yourself as the all-American hero and all these things in public and not let a single crack show. And that's kind of just a pervasive thing that you just don't talk about it, and you're just not meant to deal with it. You're not supposed to think along those terms because you're putting on a facade. You're a face and you're an actor. Basically, it's not about who you as a person are. So, there's of course counseling and behavioral health and all those things are out there for the military. I would say that the military themselves does not grasp or understand um, the aspects of that need to happen in order for it to actually work, in order to bring down the number of suicides in the military. But it is available, and God willing, it helps those who are willing to be helped.
Here you are, uh beside, like, in the military, besides being an atheist, but you are this young man that has a high sense of justice, a high sense of morals and ethics. You have this background. How did you deal with something like that personally? What helped you?
For me, there was a point in Iraq where I was thinking about suicide. I was very depressed, and I started to realize the lack of quality of the individuals around me. Um, and I took actions towards that goal that inevitably led me to realize that I hadn't gone through all of these things for nothing, and that I, I wanted to live my life to ensure other people would not have to experience the life I had already experienced.
Wow. Do you think finding God ultimately also helped you in a way?
Absolutely.
Hmm. That's so crazy, man. I'm gonna leave the topic alone, but I want to ask you a last question because there are so many people that I know, friends of mine, that are suffering from PTSD. Um, I had and have myself from living on the streets and everything like that. What would you advise anything to people that are going through something like that? Is there anything you could say about that?
Yeah, so I have PTSD myself. I am diagnosed with PTSD, and it's something I have struggled with throughout most of my life and military career. Um, yeah, and it's something that I've tried to assist through my companies and other things with. We raise funds for charities that assist veterans, such as Battle Dogs up in Alaska, and some other things like that. But I kind of alluded to why counseling doesn't work, but I did also say I have a background in forensic psychology, and I'm not at the same time a fan of behavioral therapy and psychological counseling. Largely, that's because there's something called mandatory reporting, which is, of course, if you want to kill someone, if you want to kill yourself, if you want to, if you've done something in the past that violated those mandatory reporting guidelines, then nothing you say is actually protected. But what that equates to in the military and in the veteran community is that if you have things you actually need to talk about, they're going to make your life harder and worse if you talk about them. And
Hmm.
that's essentially what it boils down to. So I would encourage those people to go and find the non mandatory reporters, find the chaplains, find battle dogs, find athletes who are high performers,
Hmm.
find gurus, frankly. If you've never done, drugs or THC or mushrooms or DMT, do it responsibly, but find a place that is safe for you and try those things. And frankly, um, when I did get out of the military, I finally decided I was going to try DMT, THC, and mushrooms. And I feel I got more healing and more clarity out of those than I got out of anything the military ever offered me.
Yeah, I hear that they starting to, at least here in New Jersey, in psychology, they're starting to look into psilocybin. I don't know if it's true. I don't know. I'm kind of. It would be good if they are, because like
Yep.
you mentioned, I myself also, have gone through DMT and stuff like that. I've had those experiences, and I think it's mind altering, man. I think it might be necessary. Um,
And I just want to add to that. I have some friends in SEAL Team 7 and the David R. Metcalf Foundation, who's a PA who was in SEAL Team 7 who took his life. But they've gone way out of their way to do a study on micro brain injuries and how that actually changes the chemistry, but also on ibogaine and DMT retreats in Mexico where they're able to study these things. And so far, the results are extremely promising. And when it comes to the special operations community, it's a very small community, and I think you would be hard pressed to find anyone out of the special ops community who wouldn't tell you these are good things. So if you are suffering, um, and maybe you haven't heard it, you just need someone to tell you. It's okay to try those things to help yourself. Obviously, don't get carried away, but it is totally okay to go and find that help.
Yeah, I would also suggest Amanita muscaria because I'm Slavic and it's big in our culture. It's been around for thousands of years. Amanita muscaria, even microdosing. If you would start with microdosing every day, man, it's amazing the way it works. It's truly, I believe, is God given. I must apologize because I lied because I have a couple more questions on the subject. You said you said that there was a condition that you got from Iraq. Could you tell us about the condition and what happened when you got it? Like, was there, a situation that happened?
Yep. So I was going on a mission where I was actually tasked down to cover the West Virginia National Guard unit because they would not send out their own medics because their own medics were female. And for whatever reason, equality and all that, they decided, okay, we're going to send from brigade and he's going to go with this unit. So they were doing a route clearance mission that was like a 24-hour thing going, up to the Turkish border and then down through Mosul, down to Baghdad and back to Camp Diamondback and Rez. So um, during that time, I have a bit of amnesia from the whole event, but we at some point went through a traffic circle in Mosul and took an IED. Apparently, I did a mace exam on a couple people and I acted normal, but I don't remember.
Wow.
And a couple of weeks later, I was being asked, why didn't I go to my follow up for my TBI or my traumatic brain injury for getting tested? But after that, I started having migraines that felt like I was hit by a truck and started having PTSD symptoms and some of those things. But along with that, I became what's called an acquired savant. So essentially, when you have a brain injury, your brain tissue starts to repair, and you have neuroplasticity, which is it can form new neural pathways.
Mhm.
And for me, I became somewhat smarter than I had been. So I wasn't dumb before I joined the army. I I was very smart in individual points of data. But after my head injury, it was as if all of those points of data were pixels on a screen, and I could see the spider web between them, and I could see the full picture. So I started to see what I would say is a systems understanding, as if it was a natural understanding. So that immediately translated into mechanics. I came back from Iraq. I started building cars from the frame up just
Oh,
naturally. Nobody ever taught me. I didn't know anything about it, but I just did it because everything went where it was supposed to go and it just made sense to me. Anatomy and physiology followed along with that because I was a medic. And then I started looking at how I could turn those inventions I was working on into reality. And so finance started making sense to me. And I would say after that, the corruption in government started making a lot of sense to me.
this will so. By the way, how are the headaches, man?
I do get migraines or headaches about 2 to 4 times a week, and a pretty severe one, maybe once or twice a month. I manage them mostly with Excedrin migraine, which is probably not the best for you. And I tried just about everything under the sun for prescriptions to Botox to injectables and everything else, and nothing has been too effective, to be honest.
Try Amanita muscaria maybe if you haven't tried it, microdosing, or maybe you have tried it, man. Definitely look into that, man. And I also suffer from headaches. So my wife, she's like really big on herbs, and she found me some type of herb. I'll send it to you in the email. Maybe you want to look at it later on. Um, so this will be my last question on that topic for sure, man. Now looking back, do you think that we should have, it's bad to look back in history and say shouldn't or should have or should or shouldn't have, because things happen the way they happen. But looking back, do you think that US should have been in Iraq, shouldn't have been in Iraq, and what are the reasons for either or?
We absolutely should not have been there. There was no legal justification for the Iraq War. We shouldn't have been in Afghanistan either. And, of course, we could go into 9/11 if you want to, but the motivations behind that and the whole thing with Osama bin Laden and all that, it's a bag of snakes we could get into. But realistically, there is no just war, and we haven't been in a just war in American history, and we haven't won a war in our lifetimes. Uh, and realistically, I would argue we haven't won a war since the Civil War.
Looking at it from a global perspective, do you think military is necessary for, because you're running for president, and I do pray that you become president because we need you, man. Um,
Well,
do you?
just
Yeah,
to be clear, I did close down my campaign September 28th in 2023. So unfortunately, I'm no longer an official candidate. If you
yeah,
want to write me in, hey, I'll appreciate it. Being realistic, I'm not going to win, but your other options are not better. I guarantee you
yeah.
that.